Let's begin this morning with Paul's words. Knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. How big is your heart? How much can it hold? When I thought of that question, I immediately remembered Sojourner Truth's words when she spoke in 1851 at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. You can find it online if you type in Sojourner Truth, "Ain't I a Woman?" because she repeats that phrase, "Ain't I a woman?" time and time again. And she says in her little speech, she says, then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? And a member from the audience whispers, intellect. She says, that's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint, and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? This idea of being a container is something that Teresa of Avila speaks about in her writings. She talks about us being a container for God's love, which God fills up. And you might remember her words that Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on this earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassion on the world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses the world. Christ has no body on earth but yours. This idea of being filled up by the infinite God, that's what Paul is referring to. And so whatever size your heart is or your being is, can it be full of God's love? I want to look at Paul's progressive thought here, where each thing builds upon the one before, making way for the next. Yet I want to do it in reverse. I want to start with hope. Gabriel Marcel, a French philosopher at the turn of the last century, actually lived until 1973, but he was born in 1889, was a leading Christian existentialist. He wrote prolifically. But I want to illuminate some of what he said in his two-volume work entitled The Mystery of Being. Because I want to highlight how he talks about hope. There is, of course, the hope with which we're familiar, like, I hope that I get that job, or I hope that I get that part in the play, or I hope that everything turns out okay, or I hope that we get there on time. Yes, there's that. But this isn't the kind of hope that Gabriel Marcel is speaking about. He's talking about the hope which is already there. My teacher, Jim Finley, says it this way. Marcel is talking about hoping in the inexhaustible oneness of God. Hoping in the inexhaustible oneness of God, and the very mystery of ourself, like an inexhaustible hope that will ever more deeply realize that there's nothing to hope for because the infinite generosity of God is already completely given to us. This is the hope that I think Paul is speaking about. So let me give you an example. You might hope for relationships of peace, or particularly a particular relationship of peace. And it's in the hoping that you've already been given the first steps in making it a reality. God's love is being poured into your heart to reveal itself in the longings of your heart. This hope in God's inexhaustible oneness and its availability to us is reflected in our character, this calm and certain peace that God has given us what we need. God's inexhaustible oneness and its availability to us nurtures and tutors God's love within us. Love helps us learn to trust. Love strengthens our fortitude. Love never fails, it's steadfast. And so love creates within us a patient endurance because God's love is unconditional. And unconditional love is not threatened, because it does not rely on anything around it in order to exist. The inexhaustible oneness of God generates its own power from its very self. It does not grow weary because it's not fostered or inspired by the recipient. Unconditional love is fostered and inspired by the infinite God, and the infinite God keeps giving, and so we are continually given. God's love is eternal. God is eternal. Thus, God's love endures. In this endurance, it cannot be threatened by suffering. To the contrary, endurance is strengthened by suffering, because with every difficulty, we discover again that love can exist even in spite of the circumstances. And this is why Paul boasts. Can you believe it? He says. I was suffering in this way and God's love came through. I don't even need to fear suffering. Listen to this other time something horrible happened and God was with me. He boasts of the suffering because in every situation, God's love comes through. And he can't get over the fact that it is always there. We need to hear this now because there is a lot of suffering going on. The news brings it to our attention and our heart breaks again and again. And I want to know, and I want to ask you, do you take a moment to observe that God, who is love, can come into that space, that broken heart? I hope so. Because the alternative is to decide to never watch the news, or perhaps to eat or drink in a way which can silence the sorrow, or maybe to try to take control of something else, our eating habits, or another person, or something, so that the feeling of chaos and anxiety goes away. No, we as Christians have something different. God invites us to bring our whole selves into God's love, where it always has existed, if we would but not exile ourselves. God says, bring your whole self into God's love to erase the boundaries within you, which you yourself have created, the boundaries of where we have determined where God's love can be. Can God's love be in my broken heart? Can God's love surround this suffering, come on all sides of it and run through it? What happens when I imagine that? On Trinity Sunday, we recognize this threefold expression, our best attempt to put some words to hold on to in this infinite, eternal love, which we know to be God. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is how we talk about it. And we're going to baptize Henry Stewart in the name of the Trinity in a minute. These words are based on our lived experience, which includes Jesus' teachings. We could spend our whole lives attempting to explain how this works, and we would become exhausted in trying to do so. So instead, we tell our story. From the Hebrew scriptures, we say, God's people were in bondage to the most powerful man in the world, and God freed them and brought them into a land of milk and honey. From the Christian scriptures, we say, Jesus was dead in the grave. People witnessed his public execution, and he was raised to new life, and people saw that too. And now, here in 2025, take a moment to remember something horrible and cruel from this week. How is God, who is love, working in this even now? How am I participating in God's reconciling love in the world? What am I doing to remember the truth of God's love for all people? How am I speaking up about this love and acting out in this love? Am I doing these actions in a way which allows people to recognize this eternal love and thus join in? The world will tell you that this is just how it is. It's a done deal. There's no stopping the cruelty now. You might as well just get used to it. Don't bother trying. It's too hard. It's complicated. What difference does that small act really make anyway? Do you even know that this is the right thing to do? How do you know that? That's what the world will tell you. Shame is understood to be a weapon of the powerful, wielded to make us forget our humanity. Shame is meant to make you feel this big. But guess what? As Sojourner Truth remembered, when you feel this big, take a moment to allow God to pour God's love into your tininess. God is generous and will give to you your half measure full. I can assure you that you will witness God's love start to overflow your frame into the world in ways you didn't know. It may splash out. It might run away from you, God's love, into any little crevasses, little spaces where the healing needs to happen. This infinite source will infinitely give as we infinitely need. And that's why we say, thanks be to God. Alleluia, alleluia.